Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. I had a craving for some Irish soda bread, so I thought I'd whip some up. It's pretty easy. It's much like a great big biscuit. Now, I want to tell you ahead of time, there are lots of different recipes for Irish soda bread, and each and every one of them claims to be authentic. So as we go, I'm going to point out to you what is the basic soda bread and what are some of the variations. Here are the ingredients. Please pause and write them down. And then, hey, let's get cooking. So I've sorted my ingredients out. On the left is 4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 cups of buttermilk, a teaspoonful of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoonful of salt. Now, we would be using 1 1/2 teaspoonsful of baking soda, except for one of the changes I've made. The optional ingredients are an egg, 2 tablespoonsful of sweetener. You can use sugar. I'm using Splenda. 1 teaspoonful of baking powder. And with the baking powder, you use less soda. And it does give you a little bit different texture than using just soda. And I've got 1/2 cup, 1 stick of butter at room temperature. And I'm going to beat my egg into the buttermilk. And let me talk a little bit more about baking powder and baking soda. There is baking soda in baking powder, but there are also other ingredients that are kind of acid. Your baking soda is alkaline. When you mix it with buttermilk, and you have to mix it with something acid, it sort of neutralizes the buttermilk. If you use too much soda, it neutralizes too much buttermilk, and you don't get that good tangy flavor. So I've decreased the soda by 1/2 teaspoonful and added 1 teaspoonful of baking powder. That way we get just a little bit more tangy flavor in the bread. Your basic soda bread recipe just has soda. So now I'm going to sift all the dry ingredients together into a pretty big bowl. You need a big bowl. And all of those ingredients I listed, I'm going to put in and sift. And you really, 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 really do need to sift your flour. It makes a difference in how things mix together and the lightness of your bread. So you want to sift it. And be sure to use the measuring method I've shown you before, where you spoon the flour into your measuring cup and then you even it off with a flat surface like a knife. So we'll just get this in here. And sifting 4 cups of flour takes a bit. And you know, you don't have to use all-purpose flour. You could substitute up to half of it with a whole wheat or rye or graham flour. Now I'm going to cut the butter into a well in the middle. If you've seen me make biscuits, you know that's what I'm getting ready to do, is to make these with my hands, just like biscuits. You can use a pastry cutter if you'd prefer. You could even use your food processor if you prefer. But just to cut the butter in, you don't want to use a food processor to add the liquid. So I'm going to add my milk, and I actually have 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk measured out here. And as it turned out, I needed closer to 1 1/2, just a little over 1 1/4 cups. But first we cream the butter and the milk together, or at least part of the milk. I add the milk a little as I go along. And just like with biscuits, you want to do this pretty quickly, and you don't want to handle it any more than necessary. So if you cream the butter and milk together and then incorporate the flour, you get a better product. And it gets a little hard toward the end because this is going to be much stiffer than your biscuit dough. And you know, if you're one of those folks that just can't stand to put your hands in the batter, you can do this with a spatula or like a pastry scraper. Any way you want to do it. I just am used to doing it with my hands. And I really don't recommend a mixer because you'll overwork it with a mixer. So I've just about got all my milk in there. And I'm going to finish pulling it all together. And then we'll take the next step. So now we're going to turn this out onto my Silpat pad here. You can use your counter. And you have a really shaggy looking dough here. It's a little bit stiffer and drier than biscuit dough would be. And I'm just going to flour it a little. I'm not going to knead it. This is a quick bread using baking soda and baking powder. So you don't want to handle it too much. But you do want to pull it together and smooth it out just a little bit. Now, you saw at the beginning a picture of the finished product. So you know this is going to be a rustic, rough-looking bread. But we're going to smooth it out a little bit and make it into a ball. So you'll want to flour your hands pretty well. And I'm going to press it out kind of flat. And this should be, oh, I don't know, about 8 inches around when you're done. About 1.5 inches thick. It's going to rise a good bit. So you can see I'm being pretty gentle with it, not kneading it, just patting it, moving it around. And I'll press it down. Kind of smooth the edges. I can't help myself. You know, it would be okay if you didn't smooth it out this much. But you know, that's just me. I'm old and set in my ways. I have here a 10-inch cast iron skillet. And if you've been watching my videos, you saw me refinish this skillet in my last video. It was old and kind of beat up. But I've now cooked with it several times, and I don't even have to oil it. If you're using something other than a cast iron, I'm going to suggest that you either use parchment paper or put it on an oiled pan. And you can use a cookie sheet for this. You don't have to use a skillet. So now one tradition you see in all Irish soda bread recipes is you cut a cross in the top. And you're going to cut it pretty deep. And the story to this is that you're blessing the bread by cutting a cross in the top. And of course, coincidentally, you're cutting it so that it will rise up and not out, which you do in many different kinds of bread. So cut it fairly deep. I've seen people cut it all the way to the bottom. I don't do that. I just cut a good slit all the way across, and then we're going to release the fairies by putting a little cut in each of the 4 quarters. Now my oven is preheated to 450 degrees. I'm going to cook it for 15 minutes at that temperature. And then I'll turn the thermostat down to 375 for another 20 minutes and check it. First, I'm going to sprinkle some buttermilk on the top to help it brown quickly. The acid liquid will help it brown nice and to be kind of crunchy on the top. So 15 minutes at 450, 20 to 25 minutes at 375. I'll be back when it's done. And here we go. I'm going to put a toothpick or a skewer in. It comes out clean, so it's done. We're going to flip this onto a rack for cooling. And then I'll show you also, you can check it to make sure it's done by thumping it on the bottom. I want you to look at that nice brown crust. And thump, 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 it sounds hollow. So let's flip this over. I'm going to let it cool a little bit. You really should let it cool about an hour. I'm going to warn you now that I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have my breakfast. And the hour cooling allows the crumb to set, but I don't care. And I'm hungry. I'm going to have my breakfast here at the stove. Now, some say the traditional way to cut it is to cut it along the grooves and then slice it against the grain, I guess you'd call it. And I'll show you what I mean by that. But I actually normally just leave it in a round loaf and cut it in slices, and it makes great sandwiches once you let it cool and let the crumbs set. It's also wonderful with soups and stews, any kind of a hearty meal. And You can still see the steam coming out of this. I'm bad. But I've got my butter and jam ready, and I don't want to wait. This is wonderful Irish soda bread. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. Hope to see you again tomorrow.